My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 38 years old, and until recently, I was the chief systems engineer at Argonne Nexus, responsible for the national authentication framework that powers what you might know as the Liberty Shield project. That's the $3.4 billion biometric security system currently used by multiple federal agencies across the United States, or at least, it was working until they decided to fire me. They thought signing a contract was enough, but they forgot who was the sole name on the entire project. I didn't need to destroy the company. They did that themselves when they removed the only person with legal authorization to the system. One line of code, one mistake, and $3.4 billion vanished into thin air just because they forgot to consult me. This is how it happened. I still remember the day I joined Argonne Nexus. It was a small tech startup then. Barely 30 employees crammed into a renovated warehouse in downtown Denver. The exposed brick walls and repurposed industrial furniture were standard issue for tech companies trying to look both innovative and established. I had just finished my PhD in computer science with a focus on secure systems architecture at MIT. My dissertation on distributed authentication frameworks for multi-agency operations had caught the attention of several government contractors, but Argonne offered something the others didn't: the chance to build something from scratch. "We don't want you to improve existing systems," James Morton, the founder, told me during my interview. "We want you to reimagine how secure identification works at a federal level." James was an ex-Pentagon tech consultant who understood the bureaucratic nightmare of interagency information sharing. He had the connections, the vision, and the initial funding. What he needed was someone who could translate that vision into a functional system that even the most technologically conservative government agencies would adopt. That someone was me. When I started, we were working on small contracts, pilot programs for various agencies that wanted to test our approach. I designed a system that could authenticate personnel across departments without compromising security. The core innovation was what I called the Integrity Protocol, a dual authentication requirement that needed verification from both a government representative and the core architecture designer to implement any fundamental changes. In those early days, I worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the server room more often than in my own bed. I named the early modules after my favorite science fiction authors: the Asimov Authentication Layer, the Butler Encryption Protocol, the Gibson Firewall, little touches that made the system feel like mine, because in many ways, it was. 3 years in, we landed our first major contract, a $120 million deal with Homeland Security, to implement our authentication framework for border security operations. I was there when James signed the contract, both of us giddy with a mixture of accomplishment and terror at the scope of what we'd promised to deliver. "Lauren," he said afterward, champagne glass in hand at the small celebration in our now slightly larger office, "this is just the beginning. If we nail this, we're looking at government-wide implementation." He was right. We did nail it. The system performed beyond expectations, and word spread through federal circles. By year 5, my team had grown to 23 engineers, and we were fielding calls from agencies I hadn't even known existed. Then came Liberty Shield. The federal government wanted a unified biometric authentication system that could be used across all agencies dealing with national security. The contract was worth $3.4 billion over 8 years, with renewal options that could extend it to 15. It would be the backbone of federal personnel authentication for a generation. During the bidding process, something unusual happened. The government representative specifically requested that I be named as the primary architect on the contract, not Argonne Nexus as a company, but me, Lauren Whitaker, as an individual. It was unprecedented, but it made a certain kind of sense. I had designed every aspect of the system. I held 17 patents related to the technology. I was the only person who fully understood how all the components worked together. James agreed immediately. "Whatever gets us the contract," he said with a laugh. Neither of us thought much about the implications at the time. As Argonne Nexus grew, things changed. We moved to a gleaming glass and steel building in the Denver Tech Center. James brought in professional management, as he called it, MBAs from top schools, who knew how to scale operations. The company culture shifted from the collaborative environment of a startup to the hierarchical structure of a corporation. I didn't mind at first. The new structure freed me from administrative tasks and let me focus on refining the system. Every 6 months, we rolled out new features that made Liberty Shield more secure, more efficient, and more valuable to our government clients. 7 years after I joined, James sold the company to a private equity firm. He retired to a ranch in Montana, occasionally checking in but mostly enjoying his well-earned fortune. The new owners brought in their own CEO, a woman named Victoria Canning who had experience with defense contractors but limited technical knowledge. "Don't worry about the business side," she told me during our first meeting. "You're our technical genius. Just keep doing what you're doing, and we'll handle everything else." For a while, that arrangement worked. My team expanded to over 100 engineers, and I was promoted to Chief Systems Engineer. We had offices in 3 cities, but the core development still happened in Denver under my supervision. I should have seen the warning signs. Victoria began bringing in her own people, positioning them in key roles throughout the company. The new hires were rarely the best technical candidates, but they were loyal to her vision of turning Argonne Nexus into a full-spectrum defense technology provider, whatever that meant. One of these new hires was Evan Graves, brought in as the new Chief Technology Officer. Evan had an MBA from Yale and had worked at several large tech companies. Though never in defense contracting, his resume mentioned technical oversight, but included no actual engineering experience. In our first meeting, he asked questions that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of our core technology. "So this authentication system," he said, glancing at his tablet, "it's basically like two-factor authentication for government employees, right? Like when my phone sends me a code to log into my bank account." I spent 2 hours explaining that no. Liberty Shield was a sophisticated biometric identity verification system that integrated facial recognition, fingerprint analysis, voice pattern matching, and behavioral metrics into a unified framework that could securely authenticate personnel across agency boundaries while maintaining separation of databases. He nodded, smiled, and then asked, "But we could add some AI to make it better. Right? AI is the future." I should have walked out right then. Instead, I patiently explained that we already used machine learning algorithms for pattern recognition and anomaly detection, but that the core security architecture relied on mathematical principles that didn't require buzzword technologies. For 6 months, Evan and I maintained an uneasy professional relationship. He made broad strategic pronouncements in executive meetings, and I quietly ensured that the actual technology continued to function as designed. I suspected he viewed me as an obstacle to whatever vision he had for the company's future, but I was too valuable to remove, or so I thought. Then came that Friday afternoon in March. I was deep in code review when my assistant messaged me, "Emergency meeting in conference room A. Evan and HR legal counsel need to see you immediately." I remember feeling mildly annoyed at the interruption, but not particularly concerned. Emergency meetings were common enough in our line of work, usually related to security patches or feature requests from government clients. I grabbed my laptop and headed to the conference room, still mentally tracing the execution path of a new authentication module we were planning to implement the following week. Evan was seated at the head of the table, a woman in a charcoal suit beside him. I recognized her as Patricia Dolan from the legal department, though we'd never spoken directly. "Lauren, thanks for coming," Evan said, his voice carrying that artificial warmth that immediately put me on alert. "Please, have a seat." I sat, placing my laptop on the table. "What's the emergency? Is there an issue with the system?" No, nothing like that," Evan replied, exchanging a glance with Patricia. "This is about organizational structure." I felt the first twist of unease in my stomach. Organizational structure. Yes, as you know, Argonne Nexus is growing rapidly. We're expanding into new markets, taking on additional government contracts beyond Liberty Shield. The board has approved a restructuring plan to better position us for this growth. Patricia slid a folder across the table toward me. "These are the details of your separation package. The words took a moment to register. Separation package. Are you firing me? Evan winced slightly. We prefer role realignment. Your position as Chief Systems Engineer is being eliminated as part of a broader restructuring of the technical division. We're moving to a more distributed leadership model with specialized teams reporting directly to the CTO office. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. 7 years of building this company, creating its flagship product, securing its largest contract, and they were realigning me out of a job. This is ridiculous, I finally said. I designed Liberty Shield. I'm the only one who fully understands how all the components integrate. We appreciate your contributions, Patricia interjected smoothly, which is why we're offering a generous separation package, 9 months salary, extended benefits, and accelerated vesting of your remaining stock options. I laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Do you realize that my name is on the Liberty Shield contract, not the company's name, my name? I'm the designated system architect. Evan shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. That's a technicality. The contract is with Argonne Nexus. Your work belongs to the company. You might want to check the contract language more carefully, I replied, a cold clarity settling over me. We've reviewed everything with our legal team, Patricia said. All intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to Argonne Nexus, as specified in your employment agreement. She was right about that much. The patents, the code, the documentation all technically belonged to the company, but what they hadn't grasped was the unique structure of the Liberty Shield contract itself. And who will maintain the integrity protocol? I asked. Evan frowned. The what? The dual authentication requirement for system-level changes, the one that requires verification from both a government representative and the core architecture designer that would be me to implement any fundamental changes. Oh, that? Evan waved dismissively. We've already updated the authentication policies. The system now recognizes the CTO office as the authorized technical authority. All proper protocols were followed. And there it was, the fatal mistake. 3 months earlier, Evan had pushed for streamlining our internal authentication processes. I had appeared to agree, implementing the changes he requested for our corporate systems. But I had quietly maintained the original dual authentication requirement for the government systems, adding a clause that any attempt to remove the requirement would trigger a system-wide security alert to all connected agencies. They thought they had removed me from the system. They were wrong. I see, I said calmly. And when does this role realignment take effect? Immediately, Patricia replied. Your access credentials will be deactivated at the end of this meeting. You'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings, and then security will see you out of the building. I nodded, closing the folder without looking at its contents. I understand. We'd appreciate your discretion in this matter, Evan added. The official announcement will describe your departure as a personal decision to pursue other opportunities. Of course, I replied. Discretion is important in our line of work. Security was waiting outside the conference room, 2 men in dark suits, who maintained polite but firm positions on either side of me as I collected my things. My access badge was deactivated before my eyes, the small LED changing from green to red as the guard held it against the reader. I was numb as I walked to my car. The cardboard box containing 7 years of personal items, feeling surprisingly light in my arms. It wasn't until I was sitting behind the wheel that the full reality hit me. They had just fired the one person who held the keys to their $3.4 billion contract, and they had no idea what they'd done. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to a small coffee shop near Washington Park, where I often went to think through complex problems. I ordered a cappuccino and found a quiet corner table. What they didn't know, what no one at Argonne Nexus knew except me, was that I maintained a personal backup server in a private cloud instance. Every week, the entire Liberty Shield system architecture was synchronized to this server, a precaution I had implemented after a catastrophic data loss in the early days of development. This wasn't corporate espionage. The backup didn't contain any actual government data, just the system architecture, authentication frameworks, An operational code. It was my insurance policy against technical disaster, a way to recover quickly if anything ever went catastrophically wrong with the main system. Now it would serve a different purpose. I opened my laptop and connected to the coffee shop's Wi-Fi through a secure VPN. Then I accessed my private server and began reviewing the system architecture. I wasn't planning anything malicious. I'm an engineer, not a saboteur, but I needed to understand exactly what would happen when the system realized I was gone. The integrity protocol was designed with multiple layers of security. At its core was a simple principle: the system required dual authentication for any fundamental changes. This wasn't just a technical safeguard. It was explicitly written into the contract with the federal government. My name, Lauren Whitaker, was specified as the authorized system architect, whose approval was required alongside a government representatives for any major modifications. Evan had indeed updated the authentication policies for Argonne Nexus's internal systems, replacing my authorization with that of the CTO office. But what he didn't understand was that the government-facing components of Liberty Shield operated under a separate authorization framework, one that still required my personal authentication for any system-level changes. As I sat there, sipping my cappuccino and reviewing code, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sabotage the system. I wasn't going to leak confidential information or hold the company hostage. I was simply going to let events unfold naturally. That night, I added a small piece of code to my backup server. It was simple if my authentication credentials were removed from the Active Directory without following the proper integrity protocol procedures. The system would gradually begin to reject new biometric registrations and updates. It wouldn't affect existing authentications. No one would suddenly lose access, but the system would stop accepting new data, like a living organism rejecting a transplant. Liberty Shield would slowly cease to incorporate new information. The effects wouldn't be immediate. It would take days, perhaps a week, before anyone noticed something was wrong. By then, the issue would be deeply embedded in the system's operational logic. I went home, slept soundly for the first time in months, and waited. 3 days later, it began. A colleague from my engineering team, Alex Chen, who had worked with me for 5 years, texted me privately. Something weird happening with Liberty Shield. New biometric registrations failing authentication handshake. Evan's freaking out. Miss you around here. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. 5 days after my dismissal, the first official communication came from Argonne Nexus, an email from Patricia Dolan. Ms. Whitaker, we are experiencing some technical issues with the Liberty Shield system that may require your expertise. Would you be available for a consultation? Argonne Nexus would compensate you at a rate of $500 per hour for your assistance. Please respond at your earliest convenience. $500 an hour. A week ago, they couldn't get rid of me fast enough. Now they were willing to pay me consultant rates to fix their problem. I didn't respond to this either. The next day, the rate increased to $1,000 per hour. The day after that, $2,500. By the end of the week, as reports began circulating that multiple federal agencies were experiencing authentication failures, the offer reached $10,000 per hour. Meanwhile, I wasn't sitting idle. I had registered a new company, Whitaker Integrity Systems. I leased a small office space in downtown Denver, created a minimalist website, and began reaching out to contacts I had made during my years working with government agencies. My pitch was simple. Security systems built on transparency, distributed responsibility, and ethical design principles. I didn't mention Argonne Nexus or Liberty Shield. I didn't have to. People in the government contracting world knew who I was and what I had built. 10 days after my dismissal, the first news stories appeared. Nothing specific about Liberty Shield. The details were classified, but industry publications noted that several federal agencies were experiencing authentication integration issues with a major security system. Argonne Nexus's stock price dipped slightly. Then came the call I had been expecting. Evan Graves himself, his voice strained with forced pleasantness. Lauren, I hope you're doing well. Look, we seem to have a situation with Liberty Shield that requires your unique expertise. Whatever happened with your departure water under the bridge, right? We need you back. at least temporarily. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We're prepared to bring you back as a special consultant. Full access, $10,000 per day, however long it takes to resolve the current issues. And what are the current issues exactly? He hesitated. Some kind of authentication cascade failure. New biometric registrations aren't being processed, and existing ones are starting to degrade. The government clients are concerned. I imagine they are. So you'll help us. No, Evan, I don't think I will, not as a consultant. A pause. What do you want? Name your price. It's not about money. It's about respect for the systems I built and the safeguards I implemented for good reasons. Safeguards you dismissed as unnecessary. Lauren, please, we're talking about national security systems. Yes, we are. Systems designed with specific integrity protocols that you chose to override. Tell me, did you actually read the Liberty Shield contract before you decided to fire the person named in it? Silence on the line. Then, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that the Liberty Shield contract specifically names Lauren Whitaker as the system architect whose authentication is required for all major system modifications, not Argonne Nexus's CTO or a designated company representative, me specifically. Another long pause. We can fix that with a contract amendment. You can try, but you'll need the government to agree, and right now, I'm guessing they're not too happy with Argonne Nexus. 2 days later, Victoria Canning called, the CEO herself, offering not just a consulting role, but my old job back with a promotion to Chief Technology Officer, replacing Evan, who had been placed on administrative leave pending review. We made a terrible mistake, she said, her voice carrying none of the corporate bravado I remembered. We didn't understand the technical implications of the integrity protocol. It wasn't just technical, I replied. It was contractual. My name is on that contract for a reason. Yes, we understand that now. Please, Lauren, the entire Liberty Shield system is degrading. Homeland Security is threatening to invoke the emergency breach clauses. We could lose everything. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I genuinely was. Many good people worked at Argonne Nexus, people who had nothing to do with the decision to fire me. But I've started my own company now. I'm pursuing a different vision for security systems. We'll match whatever you're planning, double it, triple it, name your terms. My terms are simple. I don't work for people who don't value the safeguards I build into my systems. Good luck, Victoria. 17 days after my dismissal, the Department of Defense issued a formal notice of contract review for the Liberty Shield program. Argonne Nexus's stock dropped 18% in a single day. Industry analysts began questioning whether the company could survive the loss of its flagship contract. 21 days after my dismissal, I received my first government contract inquiry. It was small, just $4.2 million for a secure authentication system for a research division of DARPA. But it was a start. The contracting officer made it clear that they were aware of my departure from Argonne Nexus and the subsequent issues with Liberty Shield. We need systems built by people who understand the importance of security protocols, she told me during our initial meeting, not companies that override them for convenience. By day 30, Whitaker Integrity Systems had 12 employees, including Alex Chen, and 4 other engineers who had left Argonne Nexus, and 3 government contracts worth a combined $27 million, small compared to Liberty Shield, but growing rapidly. Meanwhile, Argonne Nexus was in freefall. The federal government had suspended the Liberty Shield contract pending a complete security review. Victoria Canning resigned. The board appointed an interim CEO, who immediately reached out to me with an acquisition offer. They wanted to buy Whitaker Integrity Systems and install me as the new CEO of Argonne Nexus. I declined. You don't understand, the interim CEO pleaded during our meeting at a neutral location, a private dining room at a downtown restaurant. The government is prepared to reinstate the Liberty Shield contract if you return. They trust you, not the company. That's precisely why I need to build something new, I explained. Liberty Shield was always vulnerable to exactly this kind of corporate interference. My new systems distribute authority and responsibility in ways that prevent any single point of failure, whether technical or human. 6 weeks after my dismissal, the government formally terminated the $3.4 billion Liberty Shield contract with Argonne Nexus, citing material breach of security protocols and failure to maintain required technical oversight. 2 days later, Whitaker Integrity Systems received a request for proposal for a next-generation authentication framework with an estimated contract value of $2.8 billion over 6 years. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad that it had come to this, that corporate short-sightedness had jeopardized a system vital to national security, but I also felt resolute in my commitment to building better, more resilient systems. Argonne Nexus didn't survive the loss of the Liberty Shield contract. The company was sold for parts, its technologies acquired by competitors, its remaining employees scattered to other firms. Evan Graves quietly disappeared from the industry. Victoria Canning emerged 6 months later as a strategic consultant for a smaller defense contractor. And me, 1 year after that fateful Friday meeting, I stood at a podium at the Federal Defense Summit, presenting our new approach to national security systems. The key isn't just technical excellence. I told the audience of government officials and industry leaders, it's distributed responsibility, transparency, and systems that can't be manipulated by any single authority, corporate or government. Security isn't just about keeping bad actors out. It's about ensuring that those inside the system act with integrity. I never mentioned Argonne Nexus by name in that speech or any public statement. I didn't have to. The industry understood what had happened, and more importantly, they understood why it mattered. Today, Whitaker Integrity Systems employs over 300 people across 4 offices. We hold contracts with 22 federal agencies. Our authentication frameworks protect some of the nation's most sensitive operations, and every system we build incorporates the lessons I learned from Liberty Shield: no single point of failure, no lone authority, no opportunity for corporate convenience to override security fundamentals. Signing a $3.4 billion contract isn't just an honor, it's power. And they forgot who held that power when they decided to fire me. They thought the contract was with the company. They were wrong. It was with me. Lauren Whitaker, the architect who understood that true security lies not just in code, but in the integrity of those who write it. They learned that lesson the hard way. I hope others won't have to. When people ask me about what happened, I usually give a simplified version. There was a misunderstanding about who was authorized to make changes to a critical system. That's technically true, though it hardly captures the full story. The truth is that no company should be in a position where firing one person can bring down an entire critical infrastructure. That was a design flaw in the corporate structure, not my code. My new systems are designed to prevent exactly that kind of vulnerability, distributing authority and requiring consensus for critical changes. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that security isn't just about encryption algorithms and authentication protocols. It's about people, institutions, and the safeguards we build to ensure that power isn't concentrated in ways that make systems vulnerable. They forgot who I was when they fired me. They won't make that mistake again, and neither will anyone else in this industry. My name is Lauren Whitaker, and I build systems with integrity in every sense of the word.